Is my microphone working? I don't think so. I don't think my microphone's working. Hey, does everybody hear me at the back? Is my microphone working? Yay, good. Thank you, everyone at the back. So thanks, everyone, for coming out today. And yeah, I really like the theme of this talk today, air. And what we're looking at is, can we avoid those great extinctions? Because what I want to look at is, are insects our saviours in a warming world? But I might add a little extra to it. And it's not the most arrogant statement you've ever heard in your life. People who save them, can we save the world? But yes, are insects and those who study them our saviours in a warming world? Because why are they so important? So a little bit about me. I'm an entomologist, so that means I study insects. That's me at the top of a canopy crane in northern Queensland in Australia. I'm also an ecologist, and so that means I study how how species interact with each other and how they interact with their physical environment as well, whether that be the environment of the trees that they live on and the earth and the soil, or those climatic variables as well, like temperature and humidity and the water that they live in as well. First of all, we all live within the environment. We are not separate from it. We live within a system of nature that benefits us as a society, whether that's us making money from it, making food that we use, or benefiting from the species within that environment that benefit us. But why are insects so important? Now, this quote is the best PR story you'll ever have for insects. The little things that run the world. And now, if you don't know who E.O. Wilson is, he's a very eminent ecologist, but also David Attenborough uses that tagline when he talks about insects. So if you're not going to believe E.O. Wilson, Davey A. said it first, so he's the one to believe. But they are incredibly important. We have pollinators. So over 3/4 of the flowering plants on this planet are pollinated by animals, and they are in majority insects. About 1/3 of our main dietary crops are pollinated by insects. So it would be a very boring table and not many restaurants available if it wasn't for insects. We also have the ultimate waste disposers. We have dung beetles. We have carrion beetles that bury waste food and dead animals. Dung beetles, one of the amazing facts actually, a cow produces multiple cars worth of dung every year. And if it wasn't for these guys like dung beetles and other invertebrates like earthworms breaking down that dung, we would be up to our knees in dung within a year. So it's thanks to these guys we're not wading through unpleasant material. So that's pretty good. And the last thing, if I haven't convinced you that these guys are absolutely amazing, if you prefer furred things, if you preferred feathered things, if you preferred scaled things, I am disappointed in all of you, but that's what they depend on. Insects are that root of the food chain. There are a lot of those things that we love so much that are furred and feathered. Somewhere along the line, something they eat, if not themselves, eats insects. So they are the foundation of these systems. And to illustrate that a bit more, we talk about there's an extinction crisis. We're in the Anthropocene, that human-caused geological age where the effect we've had on greenhouse gases and the climate and the effects that we're having on the extinction of species has created its own epoch in geological history. And we want to save that diversity. We want to save life on Earth. Now, if you want to save life on Earth, you've got to save insects. About over 2/3 of all species described are insects. If you look at just animals, it's almost 3/4 of all species are insects. And the thing that really gets me is that in the whole world, we have described 9,000 species of bird. And that's pretty incredible. But we have described 1.5 million species of insect. I do realize that now is outdated, this. But it's 1.5 million that we've described. And that's just because they're very hard to describe. There are estimates that there's 3 to 8 million species of insect out there. So when you consider 9,000 birds, a few million species of insect, if you want to save the environment, you want to save diversity, you want to save all of those important functions that they do for us, like pollination and waste burial, let's concentrate on insects. That's what we've got to save. They're also pretty beautiful. I mean, I know I'm biased, but come on. This is just absolutely amazing. So, and if you want to come up and chat in the interval, I've got some of the most mind-boggling glitter weevils, these beetles that you can come look at. They are absolutely incredible. From the wing scales on a butterfly's wings to the cute, here's a weevil, one of the cutest things on the planet. Look at its little antennae, like a little mustache. It's an absolutely gorgeous thing. But how can we help? How can we save the environment? How can we help reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we're emitting into the environment? What role do insects have in this? And what role do entomologists, the people who study insects, have in this? Main problems that we have is feeding a growing population. By 2050, we're going to have over 9 billion people on this planet. We're going to have to nearly double the amount of food that we produce on that same amount of land. We actually use 70% of our agricultural land on livestock production, and we've got to find a way of making that a lot more efficient. And the thing is, agricultural production of livestock is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. So this is it, agriculture and land. It's bigger than a lot of these other things. Transportation, industry, it's a real significant thing that we're talking about. If we can make this a more sustainable way of producing food and reducing those emissions, we're making a real benefit. Now, where do insects come in? So the idea is that we rely quite a lot on meat for our production. And we often feed cattle, pigs, chickens on vegetable matter as that food source. But for every 10 kilograms of animal feed, like soybean, which takes a lot, causes a lot of deforestation in South America, so that has carbon costs associated with it in itself, the land that it's using, you only get 1 kilogram of beef. So it's about a 10% conversion rate of the amount of energy you're putting in or the amount of matter you're putting in to what we get out of it. When you get to insects, it's pretty incredible how efficient these guys are. And one of the reasons for that is that they're cold-blooded. So whereas we waste a lot of our heat, like a leaky radiator, these guys take their energy from the environment. They're as warm as the environment they're in. They don't generate their own heat. And so they don't waste a lot of that energy that they get from the food that they eat on producing their own heat. So for the same amount of space, you can get a hell of a lot more protein that we can eat. So these guys are really efficient. And that's the remarkable thing there. 2,000 times less water to produce the same amount of insect protein as cattle. It's 3,300 liters of water to put in that much of beef protein, and 100 times less greenhouse gas emissions. So I do want to try and convince people why you should eat insects, why it's normal. And one of the best arguments is 80% of the world's nations are already doing it. We're the odd ones here. We as the Western nations are quite odd in the fact that we don't eat them. They are good food, so say 80% of the world's countries. But I think what the PR story is bad here is that we're quite obsessed with the idea on MasterChef or in the news of having a very nice bit of food and then just plonking an insect on it. It's not the best presentation. You could go into a lot more effort, but the idea is actually you farm crickets and you farm mealworms, you farm these insects on waste matter, on vegetable matter. They turn into populations of insect, and you grind them down into a constituent flour. So you have cricket flour, and that's really rich in protein. It gets rid of all of that, nobody wants to be chewing on a husk of an insect or something like this. And you bake them into delicious, delicious cookies. So does that get rid of some of the ooh factor, like that's the thing? And how I like to see it is crickets are basically land prawns, right? They're related, so I see it quite the same. I think actually a cricket's prettier than a prawn, so I think we should go out. Now, in the interval, I do have insect bars here that people can try. I'm not on commission, that's not why I'm selling these particular brands, but is anyone brave enough now to have a try? Is anyone brave? Here we go, we've got someone. So, I'll just have one volunteer for now. Please say you like it, because it won't go well otherwise. There's nuts in there, and be careful if you have any allergens.
Chris?
Oh yeah, you want one? Who wants?
Not me, this guy sitting next to me.
There you go, have one, go for it. Like I say, if you are allergic and you die, it's Northern Ireland Science Festival's fault, not mine. So the idea is we're getting past that sort of unprocessed, gimmicky, here's a scorpion in chocolate kind of stuff. Scorpions aren't insects, by the way, they're related to spiders. But getting past that gimmicky stuff and actually getting the real food, like something that means something that's trying to get the benefits. By the way, verdicts from the people who tried the bars. Wouldn't know it's made of insects. I'll take that. That's fine. Many people say, thank you, yes. So the idea is actually it's really high in protein. So what you use a lot of these insect flowers for is the fact that they're really high in protein. So you're enriching your food. You're making your bread more proteinaceous. You're making your energy bars, your protein bars. And so they're really good, nutritious sorts of food. And they're very low in fat compared to many of the other meats as well. But even after all of that, if I can't convince you why you should eat insects, they can still help us in other ways. So cows produce a hell of a lot of methane. They're quite smelly, and depending on the family member, that's debatable, that one, the humans. So how can insects actually reduce this? Dung beetles. Dung beetles again, as you can tell. By the way, the best name, the Dung Beetle UK Mapping Project, also known as DUMP, do work on these dung beetles. And how they reduce methane emissions is the cowpats. Because they're really wet, they're sloppy, they're quite, they don't have much oxygen inside them. And in those anaerobic conditions, as it's called, without oxygen, the bacteria that break down the cowpat produce this methane. But dung beetles, they go into the cowpat, they burrow through it, they eat some of it, they bury some of it, they pull it down, they break it apart, the cowpat breaks apart itself, it dries out, it stops that anaerobic condition happening. It gets oxygen in there, so the bacteria don't break it down and it doesn't release as much methane. And a study in the UK actually found that, and Finland, found that there was about a 10% reduction in the methane production just from dung beetles alone. So that's pretty significant. They're doing a good job, and that's just them going about their business in a natural field. So if we can promote them, it'll be even better. The second part, I think, is how climate change is affecting pests and diseases. So as the climate warms, insects are cold-blooded, as I mentioned. They live where they can tolerate those temperatures, where it's warm enough for them to live. They can't generate their own heat to become warmer and live somewhere a bit colder. So they are spreading as the climate warms. They're going into those more northern or polewoods towards the poles where it's becoming warmer, and they're going higher in elevation where it's becoming warmer. And so you may have a situation where you're getting pests where you didn't have pests before, new ones coming into new places. And that's quite significant because we already lose quite a lot of our food production to pest damage. Now, entomologists, we don't think all insects are flipping amazing. We're not going to try and lie. Some of them do bad things. Some of them cause diseases. Some of them eat our crops. But why entomologists are important is because we work on how to reduce that damage. We like to understand the biology of insects in order to help improve society and help us increase the efficiency of our production. This could be one of the solutions. If you get a new pest in your field or in your country, you could just blitz it with a pesticide. It works, and I'm not saying you should never use pesticides. Sometimes it's an absolute necessity. If your crop is going to get wiped out and you're not going to have any food to sell or eat yourself, you've got to do what you've got to do. But there are solutions. So pesticides in themselves, they cost carbon to manufacture. They cost carbon to apply with planes and tractors. They impact wildlife because they are there to kill insects. So they will affect bees, and that will affect pollination, which will affect our production of food. And so is it the best solution? Now, I'm all for the bad PR stories. I do get that. These are my favorite group of insects in the world. They're called parasitoid wasps, and they're a type of parasite, and they're amazing. So what you've got is a lovely female wasp over here. She lays the eggs. Instead of a sting, she has something called an ovipositor, which is an egg-laying sting. She finds a lovely aphid, a green fly that you may have seen in your rose bushes or in your garden or on your vegetable patch. She lays an egg. The egg hatches, it becomes a larvae, and the larvae eats that aphid from the insides, often while it's still alive, and it leaves the vital organs to last to make sure that it stays alive and stays fresh. So it's a smart consumer. Eventually, when the aphid has passed on, it will chew a hole in that husk. It's called an aphid mummy, and then it bursts out as an adult to carry on the cycle. And now, why the hell would I promote that? Why is that good? It's because they're really good pest controllers. You've heard of ladybirds eating the green fly on your plants. Now, a ladybird has to go around, eat one aphid, and it takes its time. Imagine you're at a restaurant, and there's 100 plates of food. You can eat one, you're getting full, it takes you a while, eat another one, you're not going to get through all of it. Whereas one of these, she goes along, lays an egg, moves on to the next one, lays an egg, moves on to the next one, lays an egg, keep going, keep going, keep going. And these guys one of these females can lay 200 to 300 eggs in one go. And it can just move through, so it can really rip through a pest population. And that's why they're so good, because they're so efficient. And we already use them. So for peppers in the UK alone, I think it's about 100 hectares worth of greenhouses that we have, where we grow just bell peppers. We actually farm these wasps in an industrial scale. You can buy them on Amazon right now. If you Google parasitoid wasp, you can buy a pot of them for 20 quid. I've done it before. It works. But if you calculate, that's what UK pepper producers use, are these parasitoids. It's about 20 million wasps that we use annually just for peppers. And we use them for tomatoes, we use them for our salad vegetables, we use them for a hell of a lot. So these things are big business. And it means that you reduce that crop waste. You don't have to use pesticides. You've got an alternative solution in these greenhouse environments. And they really are helping reduce that impact and increase the efficiency of our food production. And now, I don't know for some people if it's a bit too early to get festive. Me, perhaps, yes. But as a very merry wasp here, we have your poinsettia plants. Does anyone get those at Christmas at all? Yeah. So there is the white fly that you may also get on your tomatoes. They affect poinsettia. And there is a wonderful wasp here, Incarsia formosa, that affects those white fly and gets rid of them for you. So if you're not going to thank wasps for anything else, thank them for your poinsettia at Christmas, because they're very festive. Now, the last thing is that the weirdest stuff, insects are actually inspiring technology. Our top engineers are taking inspiration from insects in order to get some of our best advances. Not related to climate change at the moment, but we have a cockroach robot. So cockroaches can withstand really big pressures on their body, and they're very good at maneuvering, and their maneuverability is great. You put a little video camera and an audio receiver on there, and they actually go into the wreckage of earthquake sites and after tsunamis to go find people, and they're being used as rescue robots. You've got another parasitoid wasp. I did say I was biased, but you can see this wasp here, it uses its egg-laying sting to drill into the wood to find its hosts, its beetle larvae that are inside the wood. And we're using that as an inspiration for surgical tools in real surgery in humans, where it can navigate round soft, vulnerable tissues in order to operate with minimal trauma. And so that's actually happening. They're using these things in surgery. And this one, it's a beetle, and the structure of its exoskeleton is used to inspire the whitest paints you can get. And so it can either paint your car, or it can be used on your house to reflect as much light as possible and keep it cool in hot environments. And these are all things inspired based on the real biology of insects, which I think is pretty cool. And another thing that they're helping with is the plastic problem. So I'm sure everybody saw Blue Planet 2 last year or the year before, and we're all very aware of the problems that plastic serves. But it does affect us for the greenhouse gas emissions as well, because a lot of what we do, we either bury or we burn it. And so we need to find a way of removing that plastic in as efficient a way as possible. And one of those ways could potentially be insects. There is a moth, the waxworm moth, that actually lives in beehives and feeds on the wax within beehives. And an entomologist was keeping them, just for fun, and left a bag inside there where she was rearing them. And she came back the next day and she noticed all these little holes in the bag. She thought, oh, that's weird. Okay, what's this? She did a few more tests and it happened again and again and again. And she thought, okay, are they eating it? I need to know whether they're just grinding it up. Is it just being ground in their mandibles into little microplastics and therefore not really removing the plastic? It's just making it into smaller and smaller bits. Or are they really digesting this plastic? So she ground them up and she found that actually, yes, they were digesting plastic. They have enzymes, the proteins in their body that turns one chemical, one molecule into another. They were taking, in their natural environment, they'd take beeswax, which is a long branched molecule like this, and they break it down into what's equivalent to antifreeze, really. And they're doing exactly the same for polyethylene, which is the bag-making material. And so they were actually digesting plastic. And so scientists are now looking to extract those enzymes and make them into a product and look elsewhere in the insect world to see if there's more efficient enzymes or bacteria that they may host that may break down those plastic bags. So insects could be one of the solutions to our plastic problem. And now, this is a bit of a negative one, but imagine, okay, we can't do enough. The world is still going to get warmer. Things are going to get drier. Places are going to get more arid. We're going to need water. It's going to be a really precious resource. Well, beetles have got you covered. They can extract water from thin air. So this is the darkling beetle, Stenocara. It lives in the Namib Desert in Africa. And what it does is it goes to the top of the dunes, it sticks its bum in the air, and what it does, it waits for the ocean fog to come up the dunes, and its exoskeleton has these amazing structures, a series of bumps and ridges and runnels, where part of it attracts the water. It's called hydrophilic. It loves the water. It attracts it to itself. And so the dew sticks to it. And then it has these bits that repel the water down towards its mouth, down towards runnels. So it catches it, and then it pushes it down to its mouth that it can drink from. And this is now being used by engineers to create fog capturing machines. So we're using them in arid locations to put out there and get drinking water for people who desperately need drinking water. And this could be a seriously big player in places that are getting much more drier and much more arid. But the bottom line is we've got to protect insects. They do so much for us. There's so much we can learn from them. There's so much that they can do to help us in solving some of these problems from climate change. And it's particularly scary when you see, even in the main news, things like ecological Armageddon coming because insects are declining. I mean, has anyone in here worried about insects declining before? One person, God bless you, sir. There you go. So it's going to be, it is a worrying thing when you think of how much they do for us. Many more of these light bulb moments when people start to study insects, that they can find those new solutions to help us and tackle some of those problems that climate change is causing us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Never thought I'd be smiling because of insects, but that was fantastic. Wasn't that picture of the different coloured insects just stunningly beautiful? Like, quite a few people said, oh.
Oh, that's what I like to hear. That's good.
So you're inspiring these people. Do you think that we should treat people who study insects as kind of scientific superheroes? Because they're obviously more amazing than we all thought they were.
Without arrogance, yes. Yeah, I do. There's a great series of books. They're called. It's by M.G. Leonard. She was signed up by the same person that signed up Harry Potter, and she's just written a best-selling series of books called Beetle Boy, and where the people who study insects are the heroes, and it's all based around climate change. So if you've got a niece or a nephew or a son or a daughter, or an adult that just loves to read some good books, then buy those. They're very, very good.
It's amazing. You can be our Beetle Boy for tonight, Chris. Fantastic. I'm sure there's quite a few questions for Chris. Does anybody want to kick off the questions? Put your hands up if you want to start off. Yeah, there's a question there at the back. Can I have a bar? That's what she's got her hand up to ask.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. You had said sort of that for every, not that hard and meat eater here, for every kilo of beef, it's 10 kilos of sort of say vegetable matter. What would the calorie difference between those be?
Really good question. So they're calorific-wise, insects are less calorific, but in a way of it's not fat energy. They have as equivalent protein, so if you're looking at it as a protein source, and that's typically what we lack in certain areas of the world where we can't rear as much livestock. So if you're looking at a protein replacement, they're top-notch. And if you want them as a lean meat, they're also top-notch. So they are good. They also have a few micronutrients, like some of these more trace vitamins and minerals that you don't get from traditional meats as well. So they are sort of an alternative food, but they're just as nutritious for us.
You see, because of things like beef and pork and the carcinogenic associations that we have with them, is there anything like that with the insects?
Really good question. Actually, I don't know, because they are, a lot of the things with that is like antioxidants and certain reactive chemical things, agents and that. And I'm not sure about it for insects, but it will definitely be being looked into by like nutrition researchers and things like that. But I haven't heard anything negative.
No news is good news. That's probably good. It's probably a good way to convince people. Do we have another question over here?
Well, thank you for your talk. That was great. Regarding parasitoid wasps, how do you actually manage the levels of parasitoid wasps? I'm sure whenever they are killing off certain pests in a agricultural environment, how do you prevent them becoming a pest themselves?
See, I love that question. Thank you so much.
Someone added a question onto that and shouted out at random, where do they go? So if you want to take that as a two-part question.
This is the good
She
thing.
couldn't wait for the mic for that one.
These pesticides, because they're sort of a chemical, and typically they target a particular thing about an organism. For example, it will be for fish, or it'll be for fungi, or it'll be for insects. They're pretty broad spectrum. Not all of them are, but they are pretty broad spectrum. They'll kill your pollinators as well as your pests, as well as your parasitoids. And actually, higher up in the food chain you are, the more sensitive you are to those kind of risks, because there's fewer of you, because of course there's a lot of vegetables eaten by a few herbivores, eaten by a few predators, so it puts them at risk. Pesticides are a big impact on them. And can they become a pest themselves? Within an agricultural environment, it's actually a good thing, because unlike pesticides that are broad, and they'll kill lots of things, a lot of parasitoids are very specialist, because they've got to adapt to the immune system of a particular species. All of those things that that host throws at the parasitoid to try and kill it and get it out of its system. And so they are typically, a lot of them are one-on-one interactions. So as soon as your host plummets in abundance, it will follow with it. And so it sort of stays at these very low levels where they regulate each other. That's not always the case, but parasitoids are a lot more specific than predators like ladybirds are.
Yes, go ahead.
It was me that asked where did they go, because it was the 20 million of these wonderful wasps. But what I'm trying to get at is, and I know that you answered that specific thing, but can you reassure us that you entomologists have this all under control, that they're not going to get out of hand?
You've got it. Don't worry, it's fine.
But can you, I think she's asking you personally. She said, can you guarantee?
You can hire me to watch wasps, that's true. But no, they are good, because in enclosed environments, in greenhouses, then they're all contained, they stay in there and they infect, they attack what you want them to attack. And they don't really have adverse effects unless they're being introduced into an environment that wasn't their original environment, and it turns out they can use other insects that perhaps you don't want them to attack. Good question, that, because sometimes it does go wrong. because Hawaii, poor Hawaii, it kind of got absolutely battered by people going, okay, we've got a pest here now. We've started agriculture. We've got a pest. What eats this? Let's chuck this in. Let's chuck that in. And they didn't assess what else it eats before they introduced it. And we're talking, like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, whatever. Now, whenever we introduce a new insect to try and control something, there are really rigorous tests that things have to go through. Things are going to slip through the net, but people were getting a lot of trouble if they just threw it in. If anyone's heard of the cane toad in Australia, that's one of those biocontrol horror stories where they just thought, it'll eat a pest, chuck it in, and now it's caused absolute havoc in Australia. There are teams of people who study the potential impacts of playing around with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think she seemed to be asking, are they coming for us, Chris?
Giant insects will not attack you in your sleep.
20 million wasps, are they coming for us? He could be the spin doctor for insects. This is fantastic. They've never had such good PR. Does anybody else have a question? Yes, there's a question here in the middle.
So with the wasps and all, if they were to move up to the warmer areas, the people that make the pesticide would lose jobs if you were to rely on it. So are you just relying on it?
That in what we try to do in pest control, there's a huge industry around biological control and pest control. We see it as integrated pest management is what we call it, which is where we don't want to say never use pesticides. We go, people should be trained, farmers, producers, even people who use pesticides. Biocontrol companies often have a pesticide and a wasp arm, if you will. And they'll say, okay, you've got this many pests in your field right now. You're safe. Use wasps. That'll be fine. That'll keep it controlled for you. But if you see that the pests are absolutely shooting up at a certain stage of the year, you can say, this is getting out of hand. We could lose a lot of our crop now. We're going to have to use pesticides. And so it's all about finding that balance. And what wasps do is they make sure that you can make the right decision at the right time to make sure that you can keep pests low, but you minimize that impact on the environment. So people studying pesticides will keep their jobs, but they should diversify into wasps as well.
Do we have any more questions for Chris? We've got two more here, and then one a little further back.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. I think I heard on the news that Sainsbury's have been the first supermarket to actually stock insects. Do you think there's a trend that will come along with that, and are people changing their opinion?
Well, I like this story as well because, Sainsbury's are the first one on the ground to stock it, but it says a lot that Ocado were selling it for a couple of years beforehand. It just says sort of, if you shopped at Ocado, you probably didn't buy the insects and nobody knew about it kind of thing. So now you've got, I don't know. I'm not supposed to show opinion when I'm representing a society, so this is me without my badge on. But I find those ones in the Sainsbury's, they're a bit gimmicky still. It's like, here's the whole insect, or here's, unprocessed insect. Eat it, have fun, isn't it kooky? But what we need to move to is the processed flowers, and that's what they're starting to sell online as well. And there's a lot of movement towards getting policy and legislature in the UK to produce insects en masse, so we can start producing the flowers, and so we can have what I would call the real reason why we're producing insects. And I do hope there will be a movement towards it, like you're saying. I think there is an appetite for it now because the populace, all of us, we're much more wanting to do something to help the environment. And so I think that consumer desire is there now, whereas before it wasn't.
So as you see for the audience looking at that slide, do you see the picture with the X through it? Let's just do a quick vote. Put your hands up if you would try that. If you would try that kind. We're very adventurous here in Belfast, Chris. Keep your hands up so we can see how many people. Good. That's quite a lot. I would not. Do you see this one with the flower? How many people would try that?
And they look hideous. They're horrible.
Yeah. So, people are pretty open-minded if it's not presented, as you say, in that kind of gimmicky way. We've got a question here. Go ahead.
As someone from the farming background, it does weigh on me, the fact that the emissions and things with food. as somebody who studies insects, would you worry about the humane killing of them? Obviously, with bigger organisms, it's easier to kill than humane, but you say about grinding them up, and a lot of these poorer countries maybe see them just, a lot of insects, I assume they can feel pain.
Yeah, are you talking about the ethical issues between producing insects? Is that what you're asking?
Of killing
them themselves. Well, I suppose we're killing a lot of livestock for our meat at the moment. Insects, I don't know where I feel about this one, because you typically get away with a lot more with insects than you do with other animals. So it's a bit unfortunate, that where's the rights for insects is the kind of thing. But in terms of mass producing things, if we are going to mass slaughter meat for protein, I would see equivalent, it's an animal as well. So I think ethically it is similar, and people need to decide whether they think that it's right to kill any animals for their protein. If you're a environmental ethical vegetarian or vegan, then this is a potential avenue for you to get a different protein food that is lower on its carbon footprint. So it is there are big questions around the ethics of it. And I think that will be, again, up to the consumer to decide whether they think it's cruel or not.
Got time just for one more question for Chris, if anybody's desperate to ask him something. Do we have one more?
Remember, you can eat some insects with me afterwards as well, and they're not like the top picture.
Perfect. Right. Go ahead, Alan.
So, Chris, I've got to ask, is there an insect you wouldn't eat?
Is there an insect I wouldn't eat? Oh, that's good. Apart from my favourite parasitoid wasp, because how could I? That's one thing. I don't know. I think it would just have to be if someone told me it tasted bad. It's fine. I mean, we've all, working in the field and working in the jungle, you do get hungry. So if there was a very tasty insect around, I think I would eat it. And I have, yeah.
You're such a Bear Grylls, Chris. How many bars do you have?
We can break them into pieces. We've got about 24, so we can break them up into bites for everybody to have.
So once we have our break, if people want to try the bars before they go up and have another drink with Dippy, maybe you could bring some of the insects bars up, give Dippy a bit. Just stay here whenever we come for the break. We can give you all a little bit to taste, because it's just the flour in them, isn't it? It's not huge chunks of insects.
Just the flour, yeah.
Yeah. So do stay if you want to try a bit of them. And you're eating away at that in the front row. How is it? It's fine. He's here for his dinner. This is great. So please do stay to taste them. Can we please give another massive thank you to Dr. Chris Jeffs? Thank you, Chris.